Welcome, all of you, to this panel discussion about Asia. And I must start by telling all of you that as a moderator, it's my privilege to be here with a very distinguished panel indeed. And the organizers have done a really good job to put together this panel. It's my privilege. Please allow me to give a brief introduction to our panelists to begin with. And I would be mentioning the names in the order in which the names have appeared in the program, and I would also be requesting the panelists to speak in the order in which the names have appeared in the program. On my right, we have Kiichi Fujiwara. It's my pleasure to have him once again in a panel with me. We had shared a panel last year. And Professor of International Politics at the University of Tokyo. He teaches courses on international relations and international conflict at the Faculty of Law, Graduate School of Law and Politics, and the Graduate School of Public Policy. A graduate of the University of Tokyo, Professor Fujiwara studied as a Fulbright scholar at Yale University before returning to Japan at the Institute of Social Science. He has held positions at Chiba University, the University of the Philippines, Johns Hopkins University, and the University of Bristol, and was selected as a fellow of the prestigious Woodrow Wilson International Center at Washington, D.C. Professor Fujiwara is known for his writings on international affairs, including War Unleashed, Peace for Realists, Is There Really a Just War, A Democratic Empire, and Remembering the War. So we are really privileged to have you. Marites Vitug, again another person with whom I had a privilege to share a panel last year, and I'm glad, Marites, that we are together again on this panel. Chairwoman of the advisory board and a writer at Newsbreak magazine. She has written for various global media outlets, including the International Herald Tribune, Christian Science Monitor, Newsday, and Asahi Shimbun. In 2006, the Eurasia Group named her one of the 50 global leaders for her work at Newsbreak. The author of several books, including Shadow of Doubt, Probing the Supreme Court, Power from the Forest, The Politics of Logging, and Jalan Jalan, A Journey Through EAGA. How do you pronounce it? EAGA? Yeah. She was a Nieman Fellow at Harvard University and holds a postgraduate degree in international relations from the London School of Economics and a BA in broadcast communication from the University of Philippines. Great to have you. Kavi, which in Hindi, in my language that I speak in India, means a poet. And I was just telling him that I wish I had a name like Kavi, which would have declared me to be a poet. So we have Kavi Chongkittavorn from Thailand, former editor-at-large of The Nation, the Bangkok-based English daily, where he has been a journalist for nearly 3 decades, covering domestic and international affairs, as well as commentaries and editorials. From 1994-95, he served as a special assistant to Secretary General of ASEAN before returning to The Nation executive editor. He was a bureau chief in Phnom Penh and Hanoi. He was a Reuters Fellow at Oxford University in 93-94 and a Nieman Fellow at Harvard University. Currently, he is a columnist at The Nation, the vernacular language Nation Subda, is that right? Nation Weekender and Comchat Luke Daily, as well as the host of Inside Asia, a current affairs program. He's a senior fellow at the Institute of Security and International Studies, Faculty of Political Science, Chulalongkorn University. Welcome. Another person, one person hasn't turned up, Arun Puri, a journalist, so I'm not mentioning his name. He was supposed to be here, but except for him, the panel is full. We have then Thomas Etzler, China, Czech Republic. Privilege to have you. Journalist, reporter, editor, and producer. Since 1999, he has worked for CNN, acting, among other duties, as its war correspondent in Haiti, Iran, and Afghanistan. Since 2006, he has been working for Czech television as a reporter in China. He also worked as the external reporter for the Czech weekly Respect and for the newspaper Lidov Noviny. Privileged to have you. And last but not least, we have Jennifer Chow from USA as Deputy Director of Programming Radio Free Asia USA. Ms. Chow plans, directs, and supervises the development of program materials for Radio Free Asia's Mandarin, Cantonese, Tibetan, Uyghur, and Korean services. In her prior position, she led RFA's Mandarin service, establishing it as a leading broadcaster for breaking stories from inside China. In 2007-2008, Ms. Chow wrote a weekly blog about China for the Weekly Standard magazine. Born in Taiwan and educated in the United States, Ms. Chow received a PhD in East Asian Studies and an MA in Comparative Literature from UCLA. She completed her BA in English from Taiwan's National Chengchi University. Privilege. So you will notice that we have really a very distinguished panel, and what is also very encouraging for me, a good balance between academics and journalists, and also a good balance between different regions under discussion. A word about the theme of the overall conference, which we must keep in mind in our discussion. In accordance with the wishes of the late President Havel, this year's conference focuses, as you know, on the relationship between democracy and the media. He was thrilled by the role of technology in non-democratic countries as well as in democratic societies, revealing atrocities and injustices and redefining responsibility and accountability. As you know, this year's conference, the overall conference, has been kept with his interests and with his wishes in mind. As far as this panel is concerned, ladies and gentlemen, to which you have chosen to come, our thoughts are to give you in a brief outline the following. Asia is not only the most populous continent, but also an emerging economic center of gravity of the world. It is at the same time characterized by diversity in different domains. What happens to the democratic aspiration in this part of the world will have serious implications for the rest of the world. The media has an important role to play in it. The following questions are significant in this context. How have the media and democracy influenced each other in Asia? What are the persisting constraints in further democratizing of Asia? Has the changing face of the media affected the Asian democratic experience, or rather different Asian experiences? And I emphasize this because really you must appreciate the diversity of Asia, and therefore you cannot think of Asia in terms of undergoing one kind of experience. Actually, there are different kinds of experiences that Asia is experiencing. And what are the prospects for the future? These are the 4 questions which I have outlined and conveyed to the panelists, and I would request them to the extent possible if they would kindly keep these questions in mind. I have also one suggestion, namely that it is always useful at the end of initial presentation to have dialogue among the panelists and within the with the panel of the audience. I, as moderator, always look forward to the interaction within the panel and with the audience, and that will be possible if we can keep to the time limit. We have till 4 o'clock, and I would propose to my colleagues here that each one of them speaks for about 7 minutes, and after that we would, having gone through the initial presentation, after that we would have discussion within the panel, and then, ladies and gentlemen, with all of you, I would like to open it for discussion. So I think with this, my role as the moderator ends. I would become a timekeeper, if you like, and for my time management, I have a watch, an empty glass, and a spoon. So after 7 minutes, I would ring a little bell, and I would hope that panelists don't think that this is an invitation for a tea or coffee break, and so on. So with these few words, I am looking forward to this extremely exciting discussion on a very exciting theme by a very distinguished panel. And may I now suggest, let the discussion start, and let me turn to my friend, Kiichi Fujiwara. Would you please start.
Thank you. Thank you, Surendra. That was a wonderful introduction. The only trouble about this panel is that we don't have Surendra as a panelist. I'm sure he has something to say. Now, concerning your first question, how have the media and democracy influenced each other? Quite naturally, I'm firmly convinced that the media has played an impossibly great role in the opening up of Asian societies. My background is Southeast Asian studies, and I still remember the last day of the Marcos regime in the Philippines. It was essentially a state-run media, state-run TV, state-monitored newspaper, nothing else than that. But in the final days of the Marcos regime, there was a mushrooming of new medias. Malaya, Philippine Daily Inquirer, those new newspapers just sprung up. And then alternative radio media, such as Radio Veritas, became the key network station to tell what's going on in the Philippines to the citizen. As the weaker the dictatorship became, the larger the role of the alternative media. So there's no question that the media and democracy are closely related. Having said that, I have my own misgivings about this subject because well, my background is international studies, and I do have appeared in Japanese television, and the results were quite disappointing. There are three rules here. One, coverage of international news is always far fewer than domestic news, period. When the news is about foreign affairs, well, people seem to turn off the channel. And two, the least popular televisions are usually the higher quality ones. I believe the broadcast system, NHK, is serving the best international coverage in Japan right now, but very few people watch it. They only watch programs when I just keep on nodding to the anchor person. Do you think this is good? No, I don't think that's good. That's the only thing I can say in a program of 60 minutes or something. And there's a third rule, which is even more disturbing. There is a coverage of international affairs only when it is related to domestic political development in Japan. And that has to do with our relationship with China, our relationship with South Korea, only when it has something to do with Japanese politics, and there is a wide coverage. This relates to something quite disturbing. Two things. One, I believe the media coverage of international affairs in Japan is enforcing a group identification essentially composed of ethnic Japanese, and somehow strengthening the way the mainstream ethnic Japanese seem to be thinking. In other words, the media coverage that we see in Japan right now is not the one that would cross-cut national boundaries. But then I'm not only putting the blame on mainstream media, because we see two very important developments taking place right now. One is the relative decline of print media. Newspapers, magazines, these print media has become less important in the face of audio-visual media and, more importantly, the internet media. I'm sure you're aware that the Newsbreak is no longer going to be printed. Yeah. The same is going on with many American newspapers, if not Japanese newspapers. The trouble here is that with the decline of print media, the significance of words in media may be declining. Visual image becomes more important. And the second development, the rise of social media, as shown in Twitter's or Facebook, is usually greeted as a welcome development, like the development in Egypt or, for that matter, Tunisia. The development of social media is taken to be beneficial for the development of democracy in the region. That may not be the case, however, in certain circumstances. Take a look at the territorial disputes between China, Japan, and Korea at the moment. You take a look at Twitters written in Korean, or Weibo in Chinese, or Twitters in Japanese, and you see very strong negative nationalist, jingoistic terms expressed in those media. I dare say that the words that appear in some of the Twitters or internet social media are not the kind that can be printed in newspapers. Very dirty words there. The problem here is that media in various forms can strengthen pre-existing social identities, which may actually accelerate the possibility of a potential conflict. And furthermore, it may be the case that people are no longer listening to media that does not carry the argument that they do not support. In short, people who watch Fox TV are more likely to vote for Mr. Romney, but not for Mr. Obama. And people who watch MSNBC are likely to vote for Mr. Obama and not Mr. Romney. And you keep on choosing information that fits your aspiration, your prejudice, your way of thinking, in the sense that media stops to become something that opens up your mind. I did present a list of some negative aspects of media expansion, but then putting all the blame on media does not answer anything, because after all, media only means something when we use it. The real question here, and I'm just opening a question without answering it, is how we can deal with the two faces of media here, that it can bring hell and it can bring us to heaven. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. I mean, you have raised questions which go beyond Japan, indeed beyond Asia, and I'm sure in our round of discussion we would come to them. And with this, may I, Marites, invite you, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'll try to answer the big questions by talking more about the changing media landscape from the point of view of a journalist who's practicing in the Philippines. So I see one place where the future of various media in Asia will converge, in cyberspace. All roads lead to the internet. I see it as the great equalizer. When more people will have access to it, and our economy, especially in the developing parts of Asia, will expand, improve, and grow. As we all know now, TV shows, documentaries are already online. There is a site called I Want TV, and in one of the stores, a small store in the Philippines, I saw a lot of people on the computer, and they were watching a telenovela on I Want TV. It's on demand. They can watch it anytime. News websites have an on-demand video news, interviews, short documentaries. Print newspapers and magazines have online presence. Many users of Facebook and Twitter share news, both text and video. Let me cite the numbers for the Philippines. I think you'll find them interesting because we are one of the world's social media capitals. There are almost 30 million Facebook users in our country out of 100 million population, even if our internet penetration is only 29%. We rank 8th, we're the number 8th globally in terms of number of Facebook users. Number 1 is the US, followed by Brazil, India, Indonesia, Mexico, UK, and Turkey. In Asia, India and Indonesia are the leaders in Facebook use. This is a function, I think, more of population. But in the case of China, this giant ranks only 99, with more than 500,000 Facebook users. On Twitter, the Philippines ranks 10th in the list of countries with the most number of users. We are ahead of Turkey, but we trail behind Spain. So we are all, I see that most of us are all beneficiaries of this new media, but as Professor Fujiwara said, there's the heaven and the hell. We are also victims to the extent that we allow ourselves. So I will venture this very Asian comparison. Using the media is like eating Peking duck. We can slice it 2 ways or more. We can pick and choose the parts that we like and leave out the fat, the bad cholesterol. As we all know, new media have its good and bad effects. Good because they have allowed us unparalleled access to information. Good because it has broken the top-down model of doing journalism. We are no longer the single source of authority for news. Anybody with a cell phone camera who happens to be at the right place at the right time or the wrong place at the wrong time can report to the world events as they happen. This usually takes place during natural disasters, man-made disasters, and significant and historic events, like we've seen during the Arab Spring. New media are good because they bring us real-time information that transcends authoritarian regimes, except for the great firewalls in some countries. New media, they transcend physical boundaries as well as cost barriers. But I say new media can be bad because they have left a number of my colleagues in the old media jobless. Bad because they lack context, encourage instant punditry, and mob think. Sometimes we see an online lynch mob on Facebook or Twitter. But at this point, we're still in a state of transition because this change that has debilitated old media and led to the bloom of 1,000 flowers in the internet hasn't led to a business model that will allow purely online newsrooms to keep a full editorial staff and thrive. A staff that can do independent and in-depth reporting, pound the streets, immerse in fieldwork, and do conventional on-the-ground reporting. But we're seeing experiments going on wherein consumers pay selectively for stories or information from the web, while the rest of the stuff is free. Other news websites aggregate news and rely on blogs. Some of these sites have more pundits than reporters, strong on instant opinions, weak on rigorous reporting. But today, news organizations can learn about what their readers want instantly through comments, and most of all, the number of people who read, share, and discuss stories. These numbers need not necessarily dictate their entire coverage. Editors try to balance what the readers and customers want with the newsroom's editorial judgment. So today's technology and changing media has led to a phenomenon called citizen journalism. Journalists no longer have the monopoly to break the news or telling people what the news is. But I take a cautious attitude towards citizen journalism because we still have the duty to fact-check what's out there, what citizen journalists share on social media, and the leads that they give us for information on breaking or in-depth news. One more aspect from the Philippines is, for all the freedoms that we enjoy, we're usually known as the most free press in Southeast Asia. I think we're on the same category with Thailand. Our Congress has not yet passed a Freedom of Information Act, which has been pending for many years. There is a fear among some of our lawmakers that we will abuse the FOI law. Our access to information is not institutionalized. It's quite easy in the Philippines to talk to public officials. They love to talk, and they'll give you your favorite sound bites. The hard part is verifying what they tell us through digging of official documents. It's easier really for public officials to work in the dark without the glare of the media and public scrutiny. So to conclude, I'll just make 3 points. First, the battleground for democracy and media will be in cyberspace. Access to this vital space is constrained by economics. In developing countries, the poor cannot afford computers and subscription fees for the internet. Usually, access to the internet is limited to urban centers. The second conclusion is the absence of a freedom of information law is a constraint to deepening the democracy. The third point, new media have their upside and downside. As I said earlier, it's like bad and good cholesterol. It's up to us to keep the good and take out the bad. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. Just a brief comment. The total number that you quote in terms of social media and so on could be deceptive, because if India appears high on number,
Yes.
the penetration, one has to think in terms of in proportion to the population.
Yes.
And if that is done, then I think Philippines projects a very different picture altogether. If you think in terms of proportion to the population, the penetration of social
Yes.
media. Yeah, but the points that you have raised again come to new media, social media, and so on. I'm sure in our round of discussion we'll have much to discuss about the role of social media. And with this, I come to our poet, the only poet among our panelists, Kavi. So please, the floor is yours from Thailand.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I will build on Professor Fujiwara's argument and also add up to my friend here, Marites Vitug. I will look at the future of Asia, media Asia, at two layers. The first layer is between the so-called big players. India is the world's largest democracy where media culture has no influence. And then you have the Chinese media, the biggest communist country in the world, where Chinese media is trying to do the opposite. So what is the outcome? And then in between, what Fujiwara is describing as a Japanese newspaper. Okay, thank you. Oh, I hope you have heard me. I will address the futures of media in Asia in two layers. The bigger player is the first layer. You have India, and then China, and somewhere in between you have Japan. And then the second layer, I will discuss the general pictures which Marites talk about, refer to, that is Southeast Asia, which I know much better. But the reason I want to address the media in Asia and its influence on democracy is very important, because India is the world's largest democracy and its media culture is new. And then you have Chinese media, which is expanding its arms and tentacle throughout the world. CCTV tried to cover the world. China dailies published in major European country, America and Southeast Asia. The communist country tried to do the job of democratic country. And there's somewhere in between. Fujiwara was saying about Japan, focusing on the stereotype of overseas Japanese. In fact, Japanese has a concept called Nipponjin ni umareta yokata. It's so good, so great to be born Japanese. And all this report will focus on writing about the Japanese community in Southeast Asia. Now, in one sitting, if you consider in Southeast Asia, it used to be that Japanese dominate the journalist scene in Southeast Asia with bureau in Bangkok, Jakarta, Manila. Now there's shrinking. India, one journalist based in Singapore, right? The whole Asia, maybe another one trust of, press trust of India, maybe in Tokyo. That was it. The world's largest democracy out in the world. They're content of writing about their own map. India is a big country. So now it's left to Chinese media with expanding. China is trying to produce English language content in the internet. There will be more Chinese speaking English than all Americans speaking English. And they speak Oxbridge English. You look at CCTV. So it's a battle of information. And it's battle of democracy. Can you imagine if China, now, interestingly, China Xinhua news agency has more bureau than Reuters. They're the world's largest news agency, but at the moment, not many newspapers use Xinhua news, but some of them have switched from Reuters because it's too expensive. Like country in Southeast Asia, in the Philippines, in Thailand, they'll forget about Reuters or AP. They use Xinhua, it's for free. During the 70s, we used Kyodo and Kiichi Press. It also reflects to you that economic power of China reflects in the much more information coming out from China. If you don't use the Chinese information, it's your problems, because economics statistic now is still questionable, but in the future, Xinhua will probably dominate the world, maybe 10 to 15 years. CCTV will compete with Al Jazeera, France 24, CCTVs, BBC and CNN. And when I talk about all this, there's one country so small in Southeast Asia that more correspondents than India. Singapore. Singapore has correspondents throughout Asia. It's a shame. So the world's largest democracy did not do anything. So the argument ends there. Your first question, I'm sorry to say, and put focus on India. My goodness, India has how many TV? Hundreds of TV, but nothing about outside world. So India is very inward. Now if we want to look east since 1991, it's good. I think India will be more conscious of its role in promote democracy. Now, the second layer is much more interesting because we have a different media cultures, 10 countries, you know. Southeast Asia is like a Disneyland of political cultures. You have absolute monarchies like Brunei. You have constitutional monarchy like Thailand. We have one-man rule like Cambodia. You have one-party rule forever like Malaysia and Singapore. You name it. And now you suddenly, you have Myanmar, you know, top-down, disciplined democracy, which just 18 years ago, one of the world most condemned nation in the world, now turn things around, become the darlings of Southeast Asia. So it also reflects the media cultures. If you look at the media landscape in Southeast Asia, of course, Thailand and the Philippines, Indonesia, pretty free compared with the rest. Burma is catching up. But if you use criteria in the Western world, like, for example, at the moment there are 26 freedom index around the world, they would say that, oh, there is no such free media in Southeast Asia because there's self-censorship. In Thailand, in Singapore, you know. So when you look at Southeast Asia, you have to look at Southeast Asia reality through Southeast Asian eyes. For me, I would describe that Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Cambodia, and now Myanmar as a country that enjoy relatively high freedom of media. Of course, certain levels of media control still exist in electronic. For example, I give you one of the most, craziest example. Thailand is a free country. Media is pretty free, but we have a very stringent filtering regimes on online. You actually associate with country that place online censorship on countries like China, Cuba, Iran, Iraq. You won't think of Thailand. But ironically, if you measure online freedom in Thailand, Thailand is ranked very low. I mean, in the freedom index. So, but on freedom of the print, it's pretty good. So when you look at the overall Southeast Asia, you have to judge on Southeast Asia reality. And then you have country like Singapore. Singapore media said that, oh, listen, you know, we are high quality premium media. We have the best information about other country. The emphasis is about other country. Singapore also has a very good TV, much more powerful than NHK World. You would think that NHK would represent the CCTV in the world or Al Jazeera for Asia. By the way, when I'm talking about Asia, where there's no common identity of Asia, it could be Asia. When I'm talking about it could be east of Suez to the Kamchatka Peninsula. There's no such thing. If you're from London, you look at Asia, Southeast Asia is Far East. You look at India, it's South Asia. So there is no common perspective of Asia, and that is the worst. That is why we don't have the sense of commonness among Asia. That is why India does not feel that they have something to do with the rest of Asia. So I think that's my whole complaint. But Southeast Asia is changing, and to answer some of the questions posed, we are influencing each other for good because Southeast Asia has a better connectedness about media. But in broader Asia, we don't have journalists association like in Latin America, or even in Africa. We have a pocket in Southeast Asia, we have media, and then South Asia, when they get together, they end up quarreling much more. You know, you have South Journalists Organization. But East Asia, China never get together with Japan, Japan never get together with Korea. Japan is a world in itself, and it's press media, very democratic, but never influenced. And mind you, you never heard that Southeast Asian government put journalists Japanese journalists in jail. It's always Americans or the Westerner. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed. Thank you. Kavi, I'm glad that you have highlighted the diversity of Asia to this audience, because you really have to understand also with respect to media, not just that Asia is diverse in physical and cultural and economic terms, but also in respect to media. And as an Indian, the only Indian here on this panel, I think your criticism is quite valid, that India has very much inward-looking media, and there is need for India to do much more. With this, may I please now come to Mr. Thomas Etzler, please? Privilege.
Thank you very much. I do not want to start with the cliche, but I'm afraid I have no other option.
Please do.
I do believe that the world is going through an unprecedented media revolution. And I'm not talking only about incredible advances in digital technologies which started at the beginning of the 21st century and which themselves are revolutionary. Videotapes, photographs are replaced today with digital files. New external satellite modems allow journalists, allow media professionals to access or disseminate media content from anywhere, from the most remote places on Earth. All you need today to create and disseminate media is a cheap camera, maybe a mobile phone, cell phone, maybe a laptop, and access to internet, and you can do it. But what I found really revolutionary, really unprecedented, is that what huge access masses today have to media. And thanks to these new technologies and almost limitless possibilities, billions of people around the world have to create their own media, their own media content, and to distribute it globally. I believe it helps liberalization and democratization of the media, but it also supports the democratic processes in the countries these participants or these individual contributors are living. And nowhere are these trends more obvious, more strong, or more powerful than in Asia. And it's not just because of the sheer volume of populations of many Asian nations, but it's caused also or predetermined also by the positive economic dynamics in many countries. It's given by raising living standards in those countries, and it's given by the increasingly technically savvy, very, very curious and educated people of Asia, which is making Asia really, really, I think, a leader at this stage of time. Although output and consumption of media in Asia is growing everywhere, you look at any type of media, news media, entertainment media, advertising media, not everything is rosy in Asia. There are many countries in Asia which enjoy full or partial media freedom. However, Asia is also hosting several countries, or is home to several countries which belong among the most oppressive in the world when it comes to media freedom. Countries like China, North Korea, Vietnam, Malaysia, Cambodia, Laos, Singapore, or until recently Burma, are year after year at the bottom of every media, freedom media study, of every freedom media indicators around the world. The reasons are mostly political, although in some countries the motivation to oppress media may be religious, but I believe mostly it's political. Oppression of freedom of expression is happening in authoritarian countries, of course, where governments tightly control media content. Any dissent or attempt to dissent from these country governments' ideas, ideologies, or opinions is quickly squashed and often very severely punished. Many of the governments are very open about it. For example, China, when Hu Jianfan became a new president of CCTV in December last year, he addressed his employees after his appointment, and he said, the first social responsibility and professional ethics of media staff should be understanding their role clearly and to be a good mouthpiece. He later then addressed the journalists and told them, don't kid yourself. You are not journalists, you are workers of propaganda. So they're open about it. They don't even try to pretend that they are serious media outlets. That statement reminded me of 1987 when I was a young dramaturg in Ostrava studio in Czechoslovak television during communism. When I got my job, I got an audience with the director of the studio in Ostrava, and he told me that the media is a fist of Communist Party who is supposed to educate working classes of Czechoslovakia. So I've learned that media is a fist and that you educate by fist from this guy. The question of the 21st century, of course, in Asia is and especially in this age of accessible media production technologies and internet, is this situation sustainable in Asia, in the countries which I mentioned, and I believe it is absolutely not. No matter how busy those censors, and there are tens of thousands of censors censoring everything in China, mostly of course internet, no matter what they do, no matter how much they try to control what people read, what people think, what people see, in this stage, in this century or the time of internet and mobile communication devices, it's simply impossible. It is impossible, and it's getting harder and harder for them every day, although, as I said, there are tens of thousands of them. You cannot stop the internet, you cannot destroy the ingenuity of people in those countries which are seeking, which are avoiding censors in their pursuit to find access to free information. The future of media in Asia and in those countries will also depend on what will happen to those regimes there. In China, for example, nobody is questioning, of course, the incredible progress China has made economically in the last 20 years. Nobody can question that. It became the second largest economy in the world. It's becoming a geopolitical, economical power. However, in those years, China also accumulated incredible problems. Although the economy moved on, their political mindset remained in the 1970s or 70s of the last century. China is struggling with, the economy is not also that rosy. They have incredible social problems, they have political problems. I was talking to several professors last week. They said that the Communist Party in China is at its weakest since 1949. And so China has huge problems. And I'm confident to say right now, when I'm sitting here, that in the Philippines, in India, in Japan, in Thailand, in 20, 30 years, there will be probably the same or very similar governments or political systems as they are today. Will Communist Party be in power in China in 20, 30 years? Nobody is betting a penny on it, not even Chinese communists, not even Chinese professors. And any possible shift of power in Beijing will of course have huge geopolitical consequences in Asia for Chinese satellite states or their partners in Cambodia, North Korea in particular, but also around the world of course. But any shift in power will change how the media is organized, how the media is perceived, and how the media are functioning in this country, in those countries. Not only I think it will be more than just in China. So whatever happens to those regimes, the media will change, and I just hope this change will be for better. Thank you.
Thank you. I wish to share that the ruling party in the central government in India, the Congress party, has an election symbol which is like this, open hand. Now I would come back to this metaphor of open hand later in the round of discussion. China fist and India's open hand, what implication does it have for media and democracy in the future? I would like to thematize it later. But before I come to that, last but not least, Ms. Chow, please.
Thomas Etzler was saying the media landscape in Asia is not monolithic. At one end of the spectrum, we have some of the freest media environment in South Korea, Japan, Taiwan. But at the other end of the spectrum, we have some of the least free media environment in North Korea, China, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, all of which are countries that Radio Free Asia broadcasts to. Now, Burma is another country to which RFA broadcasts, but in Burma, as mentioned earlier, we see hope on the horizon. Burmese journalists no longer have to submit their work to government censors before publication, as they were required to do for the past 50 years. But I hope we're not celebrating too soon, because there still exist in Burma press laws that would allow the government to crack down on journalists and publications deemed a threat to national security. For example, in August, the government suspended 2 weekly magazines. But what's significant is that this time around, Burmese journalists refused to accept censorship without protest. They signed a petition to the president of the country demanding an end to censorship. They made a t-shirt. They made this t-shirt that says, "Stop killing press," on the front and on the back. And wearing this t-shirt, they took to the streets and demonstrated. And what happened? The government backed down and lifted the ban on the two magazines. So while we are energized by recent movement in Burma towards greater freedom of expression, we should be mindful that the progress could slow down, if not be reversed, as suggested by what happened with the two weekly magazines in August. Now, in Vietnam, China, in fact, in all of the other countries served by Radio Free Asia, the governments stifled the free flow of information through censorship, harassment, intimidation, and even imprisonment of bloggers and journalists. But the most dire media landscape is in North Korea, where every radio and every television station, every television set, every radio must be registered with the government and is configured in such a way that it can only tune into channels approved by the government. So broadcasting to North Korea is one of the most challenging tasks in international broadcasting. The challenges are twofold. One, journalistically, the news process of discovering original stories and fact-checking is inherently difficult in a country, in a closed society like North Korea. Sometimes we will get a tip from one of our sources inside North Korea, but it's hard to find someone else knowledgeable of the facts that's also willing to talk to us to confirm the story. Sometimes it takes weeks, months to verify a story. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge involves difficulty in content delivery. North Korea jams shortwave transmissions from foreign broadcasters. But the good news is that shortwave jamming is spotty, it's fragmented, because we broadcast on multiple frequencies at any given time. And we have heard from listeners inside North Korea after they defected to China that we are being heard. But in addition to shortwave, we are always exploring new technologies, new platforms to deliver our content. For example, we noticed that there's a large number of smartphones being smuggled from China into North Korea. So we have developed apps, both an iPhone app and an Android app, so that owners of these smartphones can listen to our broadcast on their handsets. Now, some of you may be wondering, how do we know that we are making a difference in the countries we broadcast to? We have a lot of what we would call impact examples. But the most poignant impact example comes from North Korea. We once got a letter from a former North Korean soldier. He wrote to us and said, in 2004, on a cold winter night, he was serving the North Korean army and was listening to Radio Free Asia on shortwave radio, and he heard that the North Korean Human Rights Act had just passed both houses of the US Congress and was about to be signed into law by President George Bush. And he said that news told him that the outside world cared about him and the people in North Korea. And he was filled with hope and inspiration. So he decided to defect. He fled North Korea, first to China, then through a third country to South Korea, where he now lives with 23,000 other North Korean defectors. So if we can make a difference, well, in this case, we clearly made a difference in the life of this North Korean soldier. And if we can make a difference in North Korea, I know we can make a difference everywhere.
Thank you. Even though we didn't plan it, but it's always good to conclude a round of discussion on a positive note. We can make a difference. So that's really indeed very encouraging. But now I would like to submit before all of you, especially our panelists. As far as I'm concerned, I was taking notes, and I think 2-3 issues are arising out of this discussion from different panelists. One is, of course, the new media. You have heard them speak. They have said that it's heaven and hell, or two faces. But we need to probe a little bit more on this issue. How does the new media promote democracy, or the other way around? So we need to probe this. The other, as I said, the Congress party in India with an open hand and the metaphor of fist that was used for China. So I would use this and say, how does this work out, open hand and fist, with respect to democracy, with respect to the policies or the practice of two major countries, India and China. And thirdly, I would like to raise the issue arising out of this discussion, future of democracy with respect to these two major concerns that have come up. Now, on the issue of new fist and open hand point that came up, I would come to, on this point, to Kavi and say, how would you respond, Kavi, to what Mr. Etzler has just now talked in terms of Chinese policy, Indian weak problem in this respect that you already highlighted? How could this open hand, a democratic country, but not doing enough in your eyes, not a very democratic country, pushing very hard, how does that speak for democracy in Asia?
Well, I think the first question is the self-confidence of Indian democracy. I think only in the past, maybe less than 2 decades since 1991, under the Prime Minister Namaha Singha Rao, that India really has confidence that we're going to look east. And in that process, it's interact with the rest of the Asia and the rest of the world, and then United States and other relations come about, normalization. And I think if India continues to rise, the rise of India is not in the news, because rise of India always gets stuck in the traffic, you know, like Thailand. It's not like the Chinese, it's always high-speed trains, sometimes faster than Shinkansen if you travel from in Shanghai, the elevated train. So I think India, if economy go on rise and have more confidence, India will, through this rise, will carry democratic weight. But now at the moment, it's none, because India is not so confident. On the contrary, China, because of its economics power, now the world's second largest democracy, it has to meet certain standard, which it has not, particularly in the areas of media. And this brings bigger questions, because now I would describe that China is at war with the rest of the world as far as information battle is concerned. CCTV in English, in Arabic, in Spanish, and it's in Swahili. It's an indication that China rise, economic rise, will need logistic support, a strategic partner that is information's partner that generate from its own side. Because otherwise, for example, Chinese embassy around the world always got very frustrated when local newspaper in Africa, in Asia and Southeast Asia, when they publish report about China, they will often quote Reuters, AFP, Ajong Phong Press, and Deutsche Welle, all these Associated Press, because they don't have the resource to send correspondence. Now, except Singapore, they have correspondence in Beijing. So what Beijing is doing is to send correspondence around the world and write about this own country. And certain time you will be surprised that some local newspaper pick up their local story from Xinhua agency. And now this will be the trend in the future. And if this continue, it will be very interesting. If China open up, become, I cannot say become democratic, become open up, Chinese influence will be far-reaching, because it has the information arm around the world already. So it just wait for the time. At the moment, I don't think China has reached that level except the economics power.
Thank you. With this, I come to Kiichi, to you. We have heard about China, India. Now, what role can Japan play in this whole thing?
Do you hear me? I would like to repeat minimal. This is no place to, play out self-serving, narcissistic nationalism here, and I'm certainly not in favor of overestimating the influence of Japanese media. There was a time once when NHK tried to globalize, and the outcome was disastrous, to say the least. There is an international program for NHK, and I shouldn't be saying this because my wife is working as one of the advisors for the international programming, but international programs from NHK is one of the most boring TV programs you can ever see. However, the question is not really there. The question is the relationship between the two kinds of media we have. One is the international media, and the second is the local media, or more precisely, the vernacular media. Media that is expressed in Korean in Korea, Chinese in China, Japanese in Japan, or Tagalog in the Philippines, for that matter. International, and I seriously doubt if China would develop an international media. And I'm not saying this because of my preference or lack of preference toward China. That's not the point. Take a look at the New York Times or Washington Post. Their network overseas is minimal. They simply do not have the money to maintain agencies abroad. Anybody who worked for the Times or the Post would know this. But nevertheless, the influence of the coverage from the New York Times or Washington Post is immense. As a matter of fact, I believe that Frankfurter Allgemeine, the German journal, has far larger number of foreign bureaus right now, but their influence, and Frankfurter Allgemeine it is one of the best, please. It's one of the best German papers, but New York Times has more influence. CNN, BBC carries a larger weight, not because of money or the number of networks. The difference is a very subtle one. We in Japan, many of us do not listen to BBC or CNN, but because of my occupation, I do wake up and watch BBC, CNN, and check out New York Times, and I'd hate myself for that. There's something extremely colonial here, but nevertheless, the international media does have an impact in opening societies. And at the same time, the international media does carry some certain cultural biases. 20 years ago, the easiest way to sell an article for the New York Times would be to start your article like, why are the Japanese this and this and this, right? You write like that and blame the Japanese for being Japanese, and you can sell it to your desk in New York. The same thing happens about China. Why are the Chinese this and this and this? Then that article will sell. Try writing how right the Chinese are, and nobody's going to read it, right? So international media does carry some certain prejudice, and there is a problem about that. But nevertheless, their influence, I believe, would still very much stay there, even when the Chinese expand their networks. The influence is not like that. One other point that I'd like to add. Old media, the fate of old media, like the print media, newspaper, magazine, I do think they'll stay, but they'll have to do their work on the cheap. Because nobody's buying newspapers like they used to anymore, and more people would be reading newspapers on the internet without paying, the revenues for newspapers, and for that matter magazines, would just get smaller and smaller. But nevertheless, there would be a very solid demand for such coverage, meaning that their news would come from a very limited budget. Fewer bureaus abroad, fewer investigators, very poor quality of coverage coming from the Post or the Times, and we'll still have to be stuck with that. And that's a problem. Thank you.
Well, listening to our panelists on this issue, you see, when you're talking about Asia, we shouldn't forget that Asia is part of the world, and we live in a world where we are all connected. Now, if China is controlling and India is lacking, if Japan is not playing the role that it could have, and if the international media, so-called CNN and so on, they have their prejudices, what future do we have for being reported correctly, so that you don't start hating yourself when you start your day with the news coverage? On this, hating yourself and not doing it, I would turn to Mr. Etzler. What do you think was the role that the American media did with respect to Iraq war? A short reply on this.
I saw an incredible documentary which is called The Control Room. It's a documentary done by Al Jazeera, Arabic. It was done, I think, in 2003, 2004, and they compared Iraq war viewed by Western media, CNN, Fox, BBC, and by Arab media. There were two different wars. I was stunned. When you see it back to back, it was completely different. Western media completely focused on the coalition forces, United States. Arab media completely focused on the civilian population. I remember I was filming, I was a producer for a US pool in the first siege of Fallujah in April 2004. I was embedded with the US Marines. Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya was embedded with the insurgents inside of Fallujah. That diametrally different. I think that media, when it comes to run up to the war in to Iraq war, I think that media, Western media, failed terribly. There were indications, there were a lot of red lights everywhere. There were a lot of warnings that what the Bush administration is claiming and what Colin Powell so infamously presented in United Nations, that this can be wrong. But world media, CNN including, missed those warnings and went with the euphoria to build up to war. So yes, I think the coverage of the war was okay, but the whole lead up to the war, I don't think that's the proudest moment of Western media history.
Thank you. I was hoping to have this kind of response from you. Thank you indeed. Now I would turn to Marites. A brief answer on this. What can be done at the level of journalists, association, let's say of Asian journalists, who would get out of this national limitations, India, China, Japan, and create a responsible, connected, and an alternative source of information?
No, I think foreign media, when they report on countries in Southeast Asia, they pick up what the national media writes. So it really begins with the quality of the reporters working in each country. And beyond that, it's very good to have exposure to our neighboring countries. For example, Kavi here heads a Southeast Asian Press Alliance. He's been dictator there for 14 years. So it helps that we have this training. We get exposed to each other's press culture. I think that's... I can't go beyond Southeast Asian Press Alliance. We don't have associations within Asia. But can I just mention something about the new media in...
No.
Later?
Later,
okay.
Later. MS Chow, what is the possibility of a responsible, integrated, connected Asian news media, informally, formally worked out? Short reply. Social media.
Yes.
Then may I please turn to social media with this comment, yeah? We turn to now the second major point which emerged out of this discussion, the new media, and you have heard our panelists say, two faces, heaven and hell. Now, if that is the case, heaven and hell, and if it's also the case that the kind of content richness which you saw in print media may not be the strongest point as far as social media is concerned, from our panel perspective, what can we do to increase its potential for promoting democratic institutions in Asia? And on this, I would like, may I please come to you again on this point?
Social media.
Social media, what can it be? How can it become more responsive and more democratically serving institution?
I mean, we discussed a little bit about already here. There are dangers. I mean, you don't know who these people are. You don't know who the sources are. However, the different researches are suggesting that all this, for example, we were talking about nationalists, Chinese nationalists, Korean nationalists, Japanese nationalists, venting. They are a small part of population, and they are very well heard as for example, Islamic extremists. They are very well heard because they are very loud, but they are not representatives of the nations. They are not representatives of the public opinion of the nations. They are just loud. They are just there. I think I agree. Social media is the future. Social media is also in the future in changing the societies. I want to give a couple examples. I was privileged enough to, in early 2007, to interview Liu Xiaobo, the Nobel Prize winner, who is now serving 11 years in prison in China. And he said, internet was a godsend to China. And it's not that difficult to find it. And it's all through social media, through Weibo. I give you a couple examples. Very recently, a month ago, 2 months ago, there was a horrendous traffic accident in Liaoyang province in China. Some 36 people died, burned to death. And on internet, of course, some local official, Communist Party leaders attended that crash site. And one official, who was the leader of the party in that region, was caught on picture on internet smiling. So that was already, that ruffled the feathers among a lot of Chinese that he's smiling. Then the Chinese noticed his watch on that photograph. They find out that he is making, in exchange, around $1,200–1,300 a month. That watch was worth several tens of thousands, like $40,000. And they start hunting him on internet. He actually responded, he said it was a gift from his family. However, they dug out other pictures of this man from other occasions with different watches. and he is now under investigation by Chinese authorities. And I see these cases like that appearing in China once or twice a month. And this is how the root movement, grassroots movement, how these netizens, as they are called, they are forcing some of the officials to be held accountable for how they behave and for their corruption. There was a case, one of the first cases of social media in China was 2007. Somebody was caught picking up wood in one of the southern provinces, was arrested and died in Chinese police custody. And the Chinese police released a report that he died when he was playing hide and seek with fellow inmates. That was absolutely ridiculed on Chinese internet, and the police was forced to do proper investigation, and it was discovered he was beaten to death. And these people were brought to justice and were arrested. So I think that's this incredible. I'm not talking now about the role of social media for journalism or for media itself, but it was one of your questions. Like how can media influence or democratize, democracy or evolvement of democracy in those countries? I think nothing else can do as well as social media.
Can I follow
You
up on
agree?
that?
Yes, of course. That's what my intention is.
That's a good example how social media are shaping public policies in China to a certain extent. Also changing even traditional media to a certain extent. But I hate to be a shameless self-promoter, but I want to talk about how Radio Free Asia is using social media to do our work. We are using social media more and more, both for sourcing and for content delivery. For sourcing, we know, as Thomas mentioned, social media are a treasure trove, a gold mine of original story ideas. Sometimes a tweet, a post by a victim of forced eviction would be deleted shortly after it's posted. It would be deleted by China's internet police. And our reporters are always watching what's being said on social media in China. And we would pick up the lead before it's deleted and follow up with interviews and investigations. So in this sense, the process of information dissemination is like a relay race whose athletes are the bloggers in China and the foreign broadcasters. We pick up the baton from the bloggers in China before it's snatched away, and we run with it. So that's how we're using social media for sourcing more and more. And also for content delivery. We maintain multiple accounts on social media sites in China. Every day we post our reports on these sites, but always without attribution. That's to say, we never say this is a report by Radio Free Asia, so we could bypass censorship. Very often, these reports are retweeted or reposted by bloggers in China. We have heard from Chinese and Tibetan bloggers who told us that they put MP3 files on their personal blogs of our broadcast to share with family and friends. So we are incorporating Web 2.0 functionalities into our daily work. But then, as I mentioned earlier, we are always exploring other platforms for delivery. We're also on satellite, and we are on SoundCloud. And every day we send e-newsletters to our subscribers in China, and embedded in the e-newsletters are proxy links to our reports. But that doesn't mean, I know this is a little off the topic, but I'll go back to, I really want to make a point about shortwave, the importance of shortwave later.
Great. Now I would come back to the original comments that were made about social media. First turning to Marites and then to Kiichi. After you have heard so much about media, social media, the future, and so on, I would like to hear what you have to say now, the two faces and heaven and hell.
No, I still believe, taking off from Ms. Chow said, that social media is really a powerful source of news. For example, it is I think it's going to be a very powerful tool in fighting corruption. I would like to cite the example of India. I've been trying to look at your model, iPayTheBribe.com. A lot of people log into that website and report extortion by police, and it's mapped on the website. And this is a tool for government to use in going after corrupt officials. And so it's going to be a very powerful tool in fighting corruption.
Kiichi?
Yeah, it's good, social media is good, excellent in exposure. Whenever there is a secret, state secret, a hidden fortress that is inaccessible from the public, then social media offers the strongest weapon to challenge it. It's easy to access. Those who want to report can do that with the minimum of instruments, like Tomáš said. And also, it is very accessible from the public. You don't really need so much effort to get it. And secondly, social media is good for networking too, to gather a group of people sharing common needs. But then this also means social media is good for manipulation. It can be used for political purposes, and it has been used for political purposes. President Obama was extremely successful, partially because of his use of Facebook. Right now, the popular Osaka mayor, by the name of Mr. Hashimoto, has become important by his clever use of Twitters. So, and finally, social media does not have a fact-checking device. So there's no real screening whatsoever related to Twitter. So all the false information can go hand in hand with more cautious interpretation. And that's a hazard. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. So you have, ladies and gentlemen, heard the panel in terms of their initial presentation and in terms of the two major issues that I as moderator highlighted, namely control, fist and open democracy, open hand, and what's happening on that front, and social media in terms of a round-up discussion. I would open the discussion now with your all permission to the audience. My request, the time is limited. Kindly make your comment brief, announce your name, and make a brief comment, and if you like, identify the person who you would like to respond to your question, and kindly be brief. Now, I'm looking in this direction, so any hand from this side that goes up. I won't stay here long, so I will turn right. Oh, yes, please. Yeah, the microphone, please. Would you like to announce your name, please?
Yes, I'm Veronika Sunová. I'm a correspondent for New Tang Dynasty Television that's based in US and broadcast to China in Chinese language without censorship. I have a question. We report very regularly and made lots of documentaries about the serious crime that is now happening in China, which is the massive forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience, especially from practitioners of Falun Gong. I would like to ask your representative of what your media have done to investigate and help to reveal or stop this crime. Thank you.
Who are you asking this?
China.
You have two persons here.
Whoever would like to
All right, so
answer.
maybe who would like to take this? Two of you? Who would like to take it?
Well, the U.S. Congress has held several hearings on the subject recently, and I know we have been reporting on organ transplantation, the issue, for years, because I'm sure you're aware of the dissident Harry Wu. This is Harry Wu's top priority issue. So we have been covering the issue for many years. I think more coverage, more congressional hearing, more international media attention, the better.
Yes, please.
You have got advantage because you are radio. You don't have to watch. I have to film, and we have to see that. And you know, as it was done in an introduction, I've been through several war zones, but I've never worked in such difficult conditions as in China. It's extremely difficult, especially when it comes to these stories, to cover them. We of course did cover them. You know, I did several telephone interviews about it for the Czech television and for CNN, as a matter of fact. But we are also dealing, because it's not just the harvesting of the organs in you know, from prisoners or executed prisoners. It's also, there's a huge black market when they fool migrant workers, uneducated, illiterate people to donating their kidneys for an iPhone or something like that. So it is a huge problem. It's, in Philippines is similar, no? Also India. It's a huge problem in China. And yes, as much as we can, of course. And I know other networks, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, English, they are trying to report on it. But China is really one of the hardest places to work as a journalist.
And yet, you are working, and we are grateful that you are undertaking this effort. Now, anybody from this side, please? Yes?
Hello, my name is Tom, and I'm a student in Prague. And I've already asked this question in the change of the role of the media conference, but it hasn't been really answered. So I want to ask again. It's about social networks and how they influence democracy. As has already been pointed out by Professor, social networks allow us to express our ideas and the things that are hidden behind us from mainstream media, which is a very positive fact. On the other hand, I mean, the users of social networks are not usually people who are the most critically thinking people. So I think the people who want to take advantage of this usually uses strong language, emotional pictures in order to achieve, you know, very undemocratic beliefs. They want to make these beliefs stand out by using this. So I would want to ask, how would you fight this? Is some intervention? You know, would you intervene in that? Would you make any policies to negate this, or would you keep it the same? Keep the freedom of speech?
Yes.
Thank you.
Kiichi, would you like to take this?
I'm not a believer of freedom of speech. That's a strong statement. The case in point would be, do you have a right to say fire in a movie theater that is full of people? I don't think you do. I'm also not a supporter of censorship. And the trouble is there's very little in between, actually. Is it possible to maintain responsible journalism without censorship? I think there is a way, but it's getting more and more difficult with social media. But having said that, if you work on censorship and argue that all anti-government statements are an equivalent of shouting fire in a movie house, then this becomes a naked support of the political regime, and we are not allowed, we don't want to do that, do we? So it's a dilemma. Frankly, I don't see any way out, except to have expectation for the reading public and the prudence of people who select information.
Yes, quickly,
very
please.
quickly. Twitter actually 2 days ago, for the first time in the history of Twitter, actually stopped a tweet, banned a tweet of a German group, neo-Nazi group, and they say for the future they will try to do that if the organizations are using Twitter, organizations which are breaking the laws of their host countries or their own countries. see, however, social media's role as a model of responsible journalism. I think social media is a platform. It's a platform for everybody to express their opinions. And yes, there is a huge share of lunatics out there, and nationalists and fascists and communists and whatever you. But I think it depends on everybody's own personal taste, morals. You know, I'm not following everybody. I'm following people who I actually verified, who I know that they are legitimate, and that I can learn something from them. You know, everybody has this choice, which I think is also fantastic and very democratic.
Kavi, you wanted to say something?
The dilemma is this. You have social media there and people using it by the days. So I think it's very crucial to educate social media user, particularly among the young and underages. Because in Thailand you have cases, you know, young girls, you know, age 6 want to show off part of their bodies without knowing what. So I think it's important to start social media literary campaign seriously amongst the youth. I think that would help in understanding, because social media you cannot, as I think Thomas pointed out, that there are a lot of lunatics out there, good and bad.
I can take 2 more questions, and yes, I can see 2 hands here. Yours I saw first. No, well, it doesn't matter perhaps. Yes, please. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Your name, please, yes.
My name is Michal, I study here in Prague. And I have a question actually related to the last comment made by Mr. Etzler, that I follow who I want, you know. But isn't there an opposite danger in social networking of clustering, you know, of only hearing people who agree with you, and thus further, you know, just stopping the real conversation and just reinforcing your stereotypes and your prejudices?
Yeah. Who would like to take this among the panelists?
He asked Mr. Hess.
Oh, you, yes.
Once again, I think it's everybody's responsibility. And I consider, for example, Chinese media a bad joke, but I still follow them. I still follow them on Twitter because I want to see what they have to say. You know, I follow Chinese, you know, English version of CCTV and English version of People's Daily and English version of Chinese Daily. Once again, it's my choice. I mean, it's really a responsibility of the individual. Of course, the people, I mean, the danger you mentioned, of course, that definitely exists. You create your little microcosm, you know, which will support your ideas, but it's your choice. I mean, people make good choices, people make bad choices.
All right, now please, I had seen your hand. Yes, please. Yes.
Olivier Claire, I'm living in Prague. What I really want to make sure is, like Professor Fujiwara, I think seriously, social media is just an amplifier of what the society here is at the international level or a national level. And only small groups with motivation can change the rules. But there is bad guys and good guys. And unfortunately, the choice that we can have is for democratic country, but not for the other countries with dictatorship and so on. So how are these people going to make a choice on media which are not even reliable, and where it's a fair of ideas and people pick up the easy one?
Would you like anyone in particular to answer this question?
Now, I would like Mr. Fujiwara to really clarify this thing, because you make an assumption, but it's really what is going to be happening during the 20 next years.
Sure.
Where is the dream? I mean, where is the dream?
May I add one comment? I hope you will allow me to your questions. There are good guys and bad guys. May I add before he answers, there are good girls and bad girls.
Okay, all right.
All right.
Yeah. The internet is such a huge process that it is virtually impossible to work on administrative control in whatever way. And having said that, there are some certain networks that aided to actual crimes. Like, for example, sharing information about drugs, sharing information about the best illegal way to commit suicide. And some exposure of personal information that is highly damaging to the integrity of the person. On these certain circumstances, there has been public investigation. And there's nothing, this is nothing against freedom of speech, this is against crime. Now, whenever these court cases are brought to attention, that network's credibility itself went down. This has happened in one of the major networks in Japan, which used to be the largest, but which was so totally uncontrolled and became a beehive of crime in many ways, and it lost the credibility. So the key word is the credibility of the public. So long as a network sustains the credibility, unfortunately, many wrong information will stay there, and it is very difficult to check that. But the outliers with more dangerous elements, an essence, an objective to harm the society, there is a possibility of criminal prosecution without damaging freedom of information. It's a very fine act, but it's still going on right now.
Now, I think we have had a round-up discussion. I'm sure a topic like this, we can go on and on, but I guess we have a certain number of questions which our panelists have answered. By way of a very brief comment on what has happened, I think we have understood better than before the diversity of Asian situation, both in terms of nations involved, as well as with what's happening with respect to democracy, as well as media. So this diversity has to be kept in mind. In certain situations, this diversity may not throw up a very promising profile, but we need to understand the reality and ask ourselves what is the situation before we can ask how to go about making it better. As was to be expected, the discussion was dominated by the new media and its problems as well as its possibilities. My own observation on this is that it's an emerging, evolving media. It has to establish its own norms and ways of being positive and not negative. I think we are in the process of evolving it, and I personally feel very hopeful. I personally feel very hopeful because you can't be having faith in democracy unless you have faith in the goodwill of vast majority of the people prevailing, if you like, in the long run. But as we all know, in the long run, all of us have to also die. Indeed, thank you very much for this. I think you will all join me in giving a good clap to our panelists. And I would also like another round of applause for a very perceptive and participative audience. Thank you indeed. Thank you very much.